Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to take some time today to talk about paragraph structure. Since we're in a part of the course where we're no longer really worrying about the minutia of grammar, and we haven't really hit concerning ourselves with the research quiz yet, the larger quiz, we're in a point right now where our main focus can kind of be just on the content and the actual structure of our work. In other words, we have a fairly good sense of how to structure our sentences and be able to communicate our thoughts. But then the question becomes, well, how do we go about making sure that we effectively structure the work as a whole? So in writing these essays, which is what you realize we're really writing. We're writing essays. We're not writing full papers yet, and we'll aim towards that later. But when you start hitting something that's 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs, what you're really talking about is an essay, right? And so there's just a few brief key components that I want to go over. So first of all, let's just talk about what the intro paragraph should look like. So your first paragraph should be your intro, and your intro paragraph should in fact be such that it is not particularly long or winding. It shouldn't be it shouldn't have quotations in it. It shouldn't have really a whole lot of evidence. Basically, the intro paragraph should work like a funnel. You give your first statement, right? And your first statement is something along the lines of in the novel Moby Dick, Herman Melville explains the problem of vengeance, right? So notice that I really have three things, right? I've named the title of the work, I've named the author, and I've given the topic. And the topic is a pretty general thing. In other words, the topic isn't the plot. It's not in Moby Dick by Herman Melville, Ahab hunts a whale. That's the plot. Save the plot really for the second paragraph. Instead, what you're giving is the material that tells the reader, oh, the basic topic itself. In other words, the idea of interest that we're going to discuss in this text is this idea. So it might be vengeance or free will or the nature of deceit, right? Any of these kind of big ideas that your essay is going to hinge around, right? So in Moby Dick by Herman Melville, the author explores the problem of vengeance, or something along those lines, right? Then what you do is you lead in those, in about 2, at the most maybe 3 sentences, you lead to your thesis, right? And in so doing, in other words, you give us just enough plot information and topic information to get us to the thesis. Now, the thesis is the thing that you want to prove, right? It's the thing that ends up being what all of your evidence is going to revolve around. When you give a quote, when you make a point, it's to prove that this statement is true. So say you decide that something along the lines of Moby Dick the whale is in fact symbolic of the inability of human beings to genuinely forgive, right? And so the topic is vengeance, right? That's just the general idea, but your thesis is instead the whale Moby Dick is not only symbolic of Ahab's inability to forgive, but is symbolic of all of humanity's inability to genuinely forgive. So in other words, that's something that other people can go, yes, I agree, or no, I don't. And so your goal then through the rest of your essay is to prove that point. So then you just need enough information to get you there to that thesis statement, right? So Moby Dick by Herman Melville is a novel that deals with vengeance, right? We know that we want to get to it being an issue of symbolism, right? The whale is symbolic of something. So I know then that for people to understand my thesis, I have to mention Moby Dick, right? I have to mention Ahab. Because those are two things that I mentioned in my thesis that haven't been introduced yet. So somewhere between here and here, I've got to mention these things because I can't just say stuff as if the reader just knows it already. So the next sentence would be the tale. So the novel tells a tale about a man, Captain Ahab, who attempts to hunt the whale that took his leg. That whale, Moby Dick, becomes an obsession for Ahab, who seems to feel that he must punish it. Something along those lines, right? So in other words, notice all that I've really done here is I've made sure to explain briefly, to introduce Ahab and to introduce the whale, and in terms of, basically in terms of vengeance. So I'm then able to go from, in Moby Dick by Herman Melville, so Moby Dick by Herman Melville explores the problem of vengeance. In the novel, an obsessed whaling boat captain named Ahab searches for the whale that took his leg. That whale, Moby Dick, is an absolute obsession for Ahab, so much so that he is willing to die in order to capture Moby Dick. Then I get to my thesis. Moby Dick himself is not just symbolic of Ahab's own inability to forgive, but one realizes is in fact symbolic of all of humanity's inability to forgive. And so I have this nice moving from my topic to my thesis. The reader knows this is what I'm going to prove. And notice that I have not included any direct evidence. Okay, here's what makes him symbolic. I haven't included any quotes or anything like that. So then every paragraph, except for the conclusion, is going to do something pretty simple. They basically write themselves, right? We can use pretty easily something called Peel, or this Peel format. In the Peel format, basically what we do is we just say that every body paragraph, every paragraph that's in between the intro and the conclusion, every body paragraph must start with a point, must give evidence, which is usually a quote, sometimes a couple of quotes, right? It must explain those quotes, and then it must link out into the next paragraph. So let's say in my example of Moby Dick, my first point might be something along the lines of let's go with something really simple. Ahab's willing to die to attempt to capture Moby Dick, right? So that would be my first point. Ahab is willing to die. Captain Ahab is willing to die in order to capture Moby Dick. Then I give quotes where literally I either actually give a quote of the narrator telling us that Ahab's dead, or I give quotes where Ahab's saying, I'm willing to, expend my own life in order to capture Moby Dick. Then I explain those quotes, right? So right. So notice here that the reader can then see that Ahab is, in fact, seems willing to go to the greatest possible lengths, right? And then I explain it, right? When he says go into the deep dark, right? What he means is, in fact, death, or something along those lines, right? And then once having explained the quote, that way my reader cannot escape from my conclusion, I link basically out of that, right? So Ahab thusly seems unable or unwilling to do anything other than hunt the whale, even at the expense of his own life. His passion is all-consuming, right? So then I know that my next paragraph needs probably to start with something along the lines of passion, or something being all-consuming, or something like that, right, to link out. And so my next point would probably be something along the lines of, right, so this would be then the topic sentence of the next paragraph, something along the lines of, Ahab's passions go beyond willing to die for the whale. They consume his every thought and emotion, right? And so then I would give some evidence. I'd say, for example, the narrator says of Captain Ahab, he piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all general rage and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down. If his chest had been a cannon, he would have shot his heart upon it, right? So I give that quote, and then I explain that quote, right? So I say things like, in this, notice that the narrator is describing not just that Ahab feels his own personal hatred, but that he is in fact blaming all ills on the whale. His passion is so extreme that the narrator provides this metaphor of his chest being a cannon, that if only Ahab's chest was a cannon, that too he would have shot not only the shells that he had available to him at the ship, but himself. He would have shot his own heart at the whale if he thought it might stop Moby Dick and thusly gain him vengeance, right? So then once you have exhausted every point that you need to make to support your thesis, then you come to your conclusion. And when I think of a conclusion, again, I think of a mathematical equation. I think of something like this. This is your intro and your body material, right? And then this here equals 4 is in fact your is in fact the conclusion. In other words, 2 plus 2 is evidence, and the conclusion isn't new. It isn't new information. But notice it's not just, a lot of people when they write a conclusion, they do this, 2 plus 2 equals 2 plus 2. In other words, they restate their intro or they just restate their thesis, and we don't need that. We've read it. We don't need it restated. What we need to know is, what does it mean, right? We need it in a way that can make sense to us without giving a new point or new evidence. And there's no new quotations in the conclusion, but it's something where we go, oh, now that I see how you've added it all up, that makes sense to me, right? So I walk away from it. Sometimes I like to think of it as a so what, and maybe not every English teacher is gonna love this, but I like thinking about it in terms of, okay, now that I've explored all of this and I've shown, okay, I've proven it, right, that Moby Dick is in fact reflective, symbolic of this issue of vengeance for all humanity, and that human beings are unable to forgive. So then my conclusion would be the thing that everyone should see that is obvious, but they probably don't because they haven't done the math, right? And so then when I get to my conclusion, I basically say, so as one can see, Ahab is completely consumed with the whale. However, the whale itself moves, given the quotations from the text, the whale itself seems to be symbolic more than just his hatred. It is also symbolic of humanity's inability to fail. And thusly, the text seems to suggest that not only is Ahab damned, but we all are, right? And of course, don't say we know there's grammar rules, but all humanity is, right? And so in doing, I've given something to the reader that she knows, right? Had she done the math, oh, well, okay, if the whale is symbolic of this for all of humanity, well, then in the same relationship that Ahab has with the whale, then that means the same relationship that we have with the whale. And thus, the same consequence for Ahab seems likely to be the same consequence that we have too. Okay, so hopefully that helps. And so when you are engaging your material, editing your work, but also editing the work of others, look for this. Check their work. Make sure that their conclusion and their intro don't have quotations. Make sure that the intro paragraph follows that kind of clear line of, okay, I've introduced the title and the author and the topic, and I've moved straight to my thesis, which is the final statement of my intro sentence. It's something that people can either go, I agree, or I disagree. Then every paragraph after that should follow that Peel format, right? So that means you have at least 4 sentences per paragraph, sometimes more. If it starts hitting 7, 8, it's pushed beyond a paragraph. You probably have another main idea in that paragraph somewhere, and so it needs to be broken into 2. And then do they have a conclusion that isn't just a restatement of what they said at the beginning and gives us maybe not new evidence, but something that we go, oh, I see how that's all been added up in that way. So, great. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all on the discussion boards.